Whoops, sorry about that. Just seeing that title or hearing me do that might have been enough to set you off. And hey, if it hasn't happened yet, I'm willing to bet that by the time we're done here, you'll have let one go. So let's just dive in, because that simple little reflex is actually one of the most misunderstood and, frankly, fascinating things we do.
Right? So what is it about a yawn that makes it so powerful? Why is it so contagious that even reading about it, hearing about it, or seeing someone else do it can be an instant trigger? That's the big question we're going to unpack today. And trust me, it's a journey that's going to take us from deep inside our own brains all the way back to our earliest social ancestors.
Think of it like we're peeling back the layers of an onion. First up, we're going to bust the oldest myth out there about why we yawn. Then, we'll get into its contagious social side. After that, we'll look at what's actually happening inside our bodies, specifically our brains. We'll even look at a really cool study involving politicians, check out when a yawn can be a medical red flag, and finally, we'll just have to admit what we still don't know.
All right, let's get right to it. We've all been told our entire lives that yawning means you're tired or you're bored. And yeah, it happens then. But the real reasons? They are so much more interesting and complex than that. So it's time to set the record straight on the biggest misconception of them all.
So what even is a yawn, technically speaking? Well, it's an involuntary reflex. It lasts about 4 to 7 seconds on average. You get that wide open mouth, the long breath in, and then a shorter breath out. But here's the wild part. It starts way earlier than you think, not as a baby, but in the womb. Ultrasounds have caught fetuses yawning as early as 11 weeks old. That tells you right there, whatever this is for, it is a deeply, deeply primal behavior.
Okay, first big thing to understand, not all yawns are the same. Researchers basically put them into two buckets. First, you have the spontaneous yawn. This is the original model, the one that's evolutionarily ancient. It's triggered by something going on inside your body. Then you have the contagious yawn. This one is much newer, evolutionarily speaking, and you only find it in social animals, like us. It's triggered by something outside of you, seeing, hearing, or even just thinking about a yawn.
All right, so let's just rip the Band-Aid off this old idea. For ages, everyone thought we yawn to suck in more oxygen when we're low or to get rid of extra carbon dioxide. It makes a certain kind of sense, right? Well, it's wrong. As NIH researchers put it very bluntly, this belief has been discarded. And why? Because scientists actually tested it. They had people breathe air that was high in CO2 or even pure oxygen. And you know what happened to their yawning? Absolutely nothing. It didn't change at all. So let's be clear. Yawning has nothing to do with needing more oxygen.
So if it's not about oxygen, then what's the deal? Well, this brings us to that second type of yawn, the contagious one. And this is where things get really interesting, because this is where a simple reflex turns into a powerful form of social communication. It tells us some pretty amazing things about ourselves. So why do we catch a yawn from someone else? A leading theory is that it's all about empathy. It turns out, study after study shows this incredible link. People who score higher on empathy tests are way more likely to catch a yawn. And get this, we're much more likely to yawn after a family member or a close friend does compared to a total stranger. It's a subconscious sign of our social bonds. It even starts showing up in kids right around age 4 or 5, which is exactly when their capacity for empathy really starts to develop. But there's another really cool evolutionary idea. It's called the group vigilance hypothesis. Just picture it for a second. Our early ancestors hanging out together. One of them yawns. That's a signal, right? It means their alertness is dipping. For the rest of the group, that's a super important piece of information. It prompts everyone else to perk up, become a little more vigilant, maybe scan the horizon for danger. So in this view, a contagious yawn isn't about being tired together. It's a subconscious trick to keep the whole group safe and aware. Okay, so that's the social stuff, the contagious yawn. But what about when you're totally alone? What about that yawn you do when you're studying by yourself, or first thing in the morning? What's that one for? To answer that, we've got to look inside our own heads. The main theory for this today is called brain thermoregulation, and the idea is actually pretty simple. Think of your brain like a supercomputer. It works best when it's at just the right temperature. When it starts to run a little hot, a yawn kicks in like a built-in cooling fan. It literally helps you think more clearly. And we've seen it in action. Studies on rats show that right before they yawn, their brain temperature goes up, and right after, it drops back down. So how does it pull this off? Well, it's a neat 3-step process. First, that huge stretch of your jaw muscles that dramatically increases blood flow to your head. Second, that big, deep breath you take brings in a rush of air from the room, which is almost always cooler than your body. That air cools down the blood in your face and sinuses. And finally, step 3.
That freshly cooled blood gets pumped right into your brain, lowering its temperature and helping it work better.
And it's not just about cooling. The yawn also gives you a little kickstart. When scientists monitor people, they find that a yawn causes a quick spike in your heart rate and alertness. So when you're feeling a bit drowsy or zoned out, that spontaneous yawn might just be your brain's way of trying to wake itself up, shaking off the fog and giving you a quick jolt of focus.
All right, so these theories sound good, right? But how do scientists actually test them in the real world? Well, this leads us to a really clever and kind of funny experiment that used yawning sounds and pictures of politicians to see how something like social status might affect this super basic reflex.
Here's what they did. They got 118 students, sat them in a room by themselves with headphones on, and told them they were going to hear breathing sounds from the politicians they saw on screen. But some of them actually heard yawning sounds, and the pictures they saw were very specific. High-status figures, like former Presidents Bush and Clinton, versus low-status, pretty unrecognizable figures. They're secretaries of commerce.
So the first thing they found confirms something huge, that just hearing a yawn is incredibly contagious. I mean, look at the data. It's not even close. The people who heard the yawning sounds were way more likely to yawn themselves, or at least feel the urge to, compared to the group that just heard breathing. It was some of the first real proof that auditory yawning is a powerful trigger for us.
But then, things got weird, totally unexpected. The researchers figured that people would yawn more for the high-status presidents, kind of like how it works with some dominant apes. They found the exact opposite. The chart here shows it plain as day. People actually yawned more and felt the urge to yawn more when they were looking at the less powerful, low-status guys.
So what gives? Why would that happen? Well, the researchers had a really smart cultural explanation. See, for humans, yawning in front of an important person can be seen as rude, right? A sign of boredom or disrespect. So the idea here is that we might be subconsciously holding back or inhibiting that yawn reflex when we're looking at someone of really high status, like a president. It's a fascinating case of our social rules overriding a biological instinct.
Okay, so far we've been talking about yawning like it's no big deal. And usually it isn't, but sometimes, and this is really important, a change in how much you yawn can be your body's way of sending up a flare, a warning that something else is wrong. And that's why this part really matters for all of us.
So, let's talk numbers. What's normal? Well, to figure out what's too much, you need a starting point. It's different for everyone, of course, but most experts say that the average person yawns somewhere between 5 and 10 times a day, maybe up to 20 on the high end of normal. Just think about your own day. That probably sounds about right. This is the baseline we're working with.
Okay, now compare that to what doctors call excessive yawning. The clinical threshold they look for is when someone is yawning more than 3 times in a 15-minute period, and that pattern keeps happening. We're not talking about being tired after a red-eye flight. This is a consistent, frequent pattern that doesn't have an obvious cause. If that sounds like you, your body might be trying to tell you something.
And you really want to pay attention to this because look at this range of potential causes. Excessive yawning isn't a disease in itself, it's a symptom. It could be linked to something like sleep apnea or insomnia. It could be tied to your emotional state like anxiety or depression. It can even be a sign of very serious neurological disorders like MS or Parkinson's. And in some rare but critical cases, it can be an early warning sign of a heart attack, a stroke, or even a brain tumor.
So we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? We've talked about social connection, group survival, cooling down our brains, and even serious medical warnings. But as we get to the end here, we have to be honest and acknowledge that after all this research, the simple yawn is still one of science's great little mysteries.
So when you boil it all down, what have we got? We have the brain cooling theory, right? The idea of social empathy, the evolutionary group vigilance hypothesis, the simple reflex to change our state of arousal, and hey, let's not forget its handy side effect of popping our ears on a plane. The real answer probably isn't any single one of these, but some complex mix of all of them.
You know, this quote here is from Robert Provine, who is a real pioneer in yawn research, and he wrote this back in 1986. And what's crazy is, that's still pretty much true today. For something that every single one of us does every single day, it's pretty wild how much we still have left to learn.
So here's what I want you to think about. The next time you feel that deep, uncontrollable urge to open your mouth and take that huge breath, just pause for a second. Are you catching it from a loved one, a little sign of empathy? Is your brain just trying to cool off before a big task? Or is it some ancient echo, a warning to your tribe to stay sharp? The truth is, we don't fully know. And that, right there, is what makes the simple yawn so amazing.